and welcome back to another great episode of the Business Talk Library on RETV. I am your host, Terrell Turner, joined by my amazing co-host, my wife, Lola Turner.
Hey there. Hello.
So today we're going to talk about an interview that we did with a gentleman that started a gourmet style deli restaurant in Columbia, South Carolina. Now, shout out to Columbia. I grew up there, so definitely have to get a shout out too. Then the name of the restaurant is
Market on Main. I got
you,
you, boo. I got you.
Thank you. I didn't want them to just hear me talk, so I was like, let me go in there give a little bit of gap there for you to come in and share something.
All right, Market on Main.
That way they can hear your lovely voice.
Thank you.
But
Market on Main, downtown Columbia.
One of the things that I think that is a topic that comes up a lot when it comes down to business owners, and I even experienced this myself. Like when I first started my business, in the first couple months, it just seemed like nothing was happening. There was a whole lot of fundamental or foundational things had to be put in place. And it was just like at some point, it's like, man, results started really flowing in. But I think that a lot of times people, as they're working through however long their foundational process is, sometimes I think people tend to give up in that phase. So that's why I thought, Josh's commentary when he was giving his advice for business owners was really good. So let's go ahead and play that, and then we'll come back to the conversation.
I would just say probably be determined and have confidence in yourself, and just, whatever you do, if you have a passion for it, just, keep pushing, and ultimately over time, it'll work out for you if you're determined about it. And you got to have patience too. You can't, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not, it's just now for us. We've been doing this about 2 years. We had a lot of development stuff that we had to do. We demolished a small building in downtown Columbia, which took a lot of city approvals and all those things, a lot of little hurdles along that road. But I would say just being patient with it, and just having a really strong, determination that you're just going to do what it takes to see your vision through.
You have it. It was a very interesting conversation. Because I think a lot of times this comes up when it comes to running a business is, that determination, that attitude that I'm just going to go get it done. And the same time, the patience to see that kind of fully develop. What's been your thought when you think about kind of the determination and patience? Do they kind of work together, or do they seem to kind of work from two different spectrums for you?
I would say they work together. I think that determination helps you. Determination is the decision to continue going at something, and patience is still doing it even when you don't see the results yet, right? So that's how I would define it. One of the things that I was thinking about when I was watching Josh's interview was another aspect of business that I think sometimes people don't talk about, or that there's kind of shame around it. And that relates to kind of having different business ideas, not really finding that one thing that you have, or starting out with, one idea and then you change a year from now. You hear sometimes at the family gatherings where they talk about Uncle Joe, who has a different business every 3 months, or has a different business or a different side hustle he's doing every 6 weeks or 6 months. It's just something new. Oh, one day he's selling tomatoes, the other day he's selling CDs, this, that. The other day he's talking about some investment in Ghana. There's always something going on, right? And I think for me, it reminds me of when we first started dating, and I had that idea. I had gone to Kenya, and I was that was my first time going back home. And I was like, man, that was my first time going back home since I left. And I remember going back there, and I just when you live in a different country and you come back, I just started seeing kind of things that if they had this here, Like if they had an app that told you when the buses were coming, you know, you would have this. If they had, you know, I saw that there was a need in the fashion industry in the space with like providing like African clothing. You know, I had all these ideas. And so I remember coming to you and just being like, hey, Terrell, so I want to start like an African boutique in Kenya and Nairobi. And I had like this whole excitement. And I was just like, man, like I really just want to do this. And, you know, Terrell asked a couple of tough questions and I got discouraged. He's like, so who's going to manage this? And, you know, I think they were really good questions. They were tough, but they were really good questions because I think for me, what it really taught me, like, and what I really learned in hindsight, looking back on it, is I really didn't have the determination to do it. Like, having patience is one thing, but I don't think I really had the determination to be like, man, this is an idea that I have and I'm willing to find out. I might not know all the answers right now, but I'm willing to actually put in the work to figure those out. And so I think as a business owner, even if you're in the process where maybe you don't have a business and you're just kind of like, I have multiple ideas in my mind that I'm just trying to figure out, you know, what is that one thing that I want to do? Don't be ashamed if you're not there yet. Like, don't be ashamed if, like, you know, you've tried different things and they haven't worked. I think ultimately it just comes down to like really deciding like, okay, where do you want to apply that determination? Where do you want to apply that focus? And just really putting in the work and having the patience. Because when I think about it now, I'm like, I don't think I had the determination to do that. But I really think for me, that's an aspect that I don't think a lot of people talk about. A lot of people oftentimes talk about like, man, this is what I've always wanted to do. I've always wanted to own a restaurant. I've always wanted to cook. But there's going to be a lot of people like us, like me, who, you know, you have 5 things that you're like, oh, I really like this. Oh, I really like that. I remember when I was younger, I said I wanted to be a flight attendant. And then I said I wanted to be, you know, someone that read news on TV. What do you call those? A news broadcaster?
An anchor.
You know, an anchor. So all of those things. So, you know, I think really just understanding, like being comfortable going through the process of figuring that out. And then really just deciding like, okay, this is what I want to be. This is where my determination and focus needs to be. And then having the patience. So, yeah.
No, I mean, I think, you know, for me, I look at it as, and I know this isn't right, but I tend to look at it as, you know, 2 different opposite things because, you know, for some reason, at some point in my journey, determination meant that, hey, the more determined I was, the faster I was going to get it.
Mm.
And I think a lot of times people
That's
are
good.
like, because they really, 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 really want something and they're determined to get it, it's almost like we tend to, I think what I've seen people do, and I've seen myself do it, is I tend to think that also means I should get it faster.
Mm. Mm.
And I think, you know, in being a business owner, one of the things I've had to do is really learn what the word determination means. Because I thought it meant that, hey, I would get things quickly. But what I'm really starting to believe or understand that it means, it's no matter what obstacles, I'm going to stay the course. Even if that obstacle means, hey, my ignorance, meaning I need to learn something to get better at it, like I'm going to stay the course, I'm going to do the work, whatever it takes for me to be successful. And however long it takes, I'm going to stick with it. And so for me, it's like, that's been an interesting journey of unlearning the wrong way to look at determination and relearning the right way.
That is really good. I actually wouldn't have thought that was the case for you. And I don't know if it's just because you've worked on it a lot since we met, but I remember one of the things that I personally have learned from you is learning to enjoy the journey. Now, I'm a little bit interested to kind of hear from you how that correlates, because at least my perspective was Terrell is one of those people who is like determined. He just knows like, hey, don't expect this to happen immediately. Like you have to put in the work and work. So I think it's interesting that you say that. I'm actually interested. At what point do you feel like it's a recurring thing where as you go through different cycles and phases, like you're having to relearn what determination means? Or do you feel like you've just gotten better over time? And then when I met you, you had kind of honed that in and understood. I'm curious about that.
I mean, it's 2021 right now when we're recording this. And
Yeah.
I would say I started learning that probably back in 2008. Because part of it was like, when I think about like when I went to college, even before college, I was working like 3 jobs because there were things that I wanted to accomplish. And I just got into this mindset of, hey, if I just work harder, then I can get there faster. And that works for some things. Like even
Yeah.
when I was in college, hey, I took 18 credit hours my first semester, and then I took like 17 the next semester. And it's one of those things where at that pace, I would graduate faster than the average person. But I think what I started learning probably when I started my first networking marketing business
Mhm.
was that there's only so much work that you can do, especially when you start like when your business involves more of you interacting with other people. Like when I just
Mhm.
had a job or when it was just school, it was only me. But when you start getting into the level of business that involve other people,
Mhm.
patience is needed because they may not be ready to run at your speed or your pace. And one of the things that really helped me learn that lesson is I was reading a book called by Og Mandino, Greatest Salesman in the World. And, in the book, it talked about, I think it was 9 different keys. So it was like 11 chapters in the book. There's an intro, the 9 different lessons, and then the conclusion. So one of the things he talked about was, reading the same chapter for 30 days straight. And like I said, normally I'm a speed reader, so I could have read that book in like 2 hours, maybe 3 hours if it was a slow day. But I could have read the book in 3 hours. But I said, you know what, I'm gonna slow down and I'm gonna actually practice this. And it took me 11 months to finish that book.
Wow.
Because I would go back and read the same chapter every single day for 30 days before I move on to the next chapter. And I think in doing that, I will say I kind of started learning that, man, I remembered and I gained so much wisdom from reading that book, that slowly, that it really taught me like, hey, you probably need to slow down and just kind of really pick up all the value that you have in the experience along the way. So when it came down to, like I said, of even whether it's my career or, even in our own business where, I would meet some people that seemed like they were moving faster than me. But what
Mhm.
I also noticed was they would get to a certain point and they would just plateau out.
Yep.
And I think it goes back to like that Aesop fable of the tortoise and the hare,
Yep.
where they were just moving so fast, and then they decided to take a break. But the person who was being steady was the one who eventually ended up winning the race.
Yep. No, agreed. And I think that also reminds me of like the whole slight edge factor is just a little over time. Consistency eventually produces a result. And I think that's also a really good book to read, The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson, really to get in the right mindset of just consistency and working to see the results over time. So no, I think that's really good. What would you say for someone who might feel like, all right, I'm employing determination, I'm employing patience, like what do they do while they wait? Like what's what's the recommendation? Like what, okay, fine. I'm taking it one day at a time. I'm being patient. Okay. What do I do while I wait for this to materialize?
I do think that's where your incremental goals come in. I mean, where when you start really like, what the big picture looks like, but
Mm-hmm.
then you start to set incremental goals, things that you can kind of judge progress along the way. I mean,
Uh-huh.
I go back to an analogy I use a lot. It's like, going on a road trip. And let's say if you're driving from Charlotte, North Carolina, and you're going to Houston, Texas. One of the things that you're going to keep in mind is as you're driving, you're looking and paying attention to the road signs that are telling you you're going in the right direction. Now, when you get to, let's say, you get to Louisiana, you see signs that say, welcome to Louisiana. You haven't reached the final destination, but because you kind of understand that there are incremental stops along the way, you know that, hey, I'm headed in the right path. I can still maybe I can stop and enjoy, Louisiana. Maybe, you can make a slight detour, go enjoy and celebrate in New Orleans, or, you go stop somewhere else. But, paying attention to the incremental stops is what lets you know, hey, I'm on the right path. And I know I'm eventually get there if I keep going, but I can enjoy these pit stops along the way.
No, that's really, really, really good. Enjoying the pit stops along the way. That's really good because I think a lot of times people focus on the destination so much. And when I say people, I have to say myself included. I do that. I used to do it a lot, but even now, I think I still have moments where I am still focused on the end goal of where I'm trying to go. But it's really, for me, what I've learned personally is when you focus on so much on the destination, you won't really enjoy everything else that happens through the process. So when you arrive, you really won't be able to appreciate how you got there. And then when you get there, like, at least from my opinion, like when you get there, it won't really be as satisfying as it would have been if you really took the time to understand each part of the journey, and even just being able to stay where you are, really. So I think for me that is a critical factor. Another thing that I think about also in the determination and patience space, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is when it comes to really trying to define and narrow in what that one thing is that you have to focus on. From my opinion, and from my perspective, like even when I think about, what Josh said with, hey, this is something that they've been working on for like 2 years, and he knew kind of where they were going and what they were trying to determine. If someone is trying to narrow down, like, okay, I know I have an idea of where it is that I want to go, or I have an idea of, I know I want to start a business. Maybe I'll put it that way. I know I want to start a business. Is through the journey of trying to sort through like what kind of business exactly I want to start, like how would you recommend that they go about that process of even trying to figure out like what it is that I want to do, like what destination is it that I'm trying to get to, and even just like navigating that process. Does that
Yeah, I
question
mean,
make sense?
I would say, I mean, for a person who's like thinking about starting a business, they don't know which one they want yet. What I always tell people is, I mean, you don't have to know. I
Mm,
mean, you don't have to start off knowing. Like, to be completely honest with you, most people who've been successful at anything, they don't know. They didn't know that's what the end product was going to look like. So
mm,
I always tell people, I mean, just try it. I mean, if it seems relatively sane, then hey, give it a shot. Let's set some incremental goals. Let's say, if a person says, well, you know what, I want to be the greatest chef in the world. Okay,
mm,
let's take a look at that. What do you need to do to get to that point? Like, what's an incremental goal? Well, you may need to go to culinary school, or you need to get a job in a restaurant. Okay, let's just set some realistic timeline. Let's say, what, you need to finish culinary school within the next 2 years. So, short term, you have some goals that you're headed toward. And if you're not making progress on those, chances are you're probably not going to be the greatest chef in the world.
yeah.
And that's okay. Let's just go find out what else you might want to do. And I think when people set these big, lofty goals of, hey, I want to be this, and they feel like, hey, I need to go do that overnight. And I think, again, taking it step back and taking those incremental goals, because it'd be going back to the road trip. I mean, if somebody said, hey, I want to go from Charlotte to Houston, and I'm like, okay, all right. 2 hours later, I'm like, hey, where are you? Oh, I'm still at the house. I'm like 3 hours later. Hey, what's going on? Now I'm just still chilling at the house. You aren't gonna make the trip.
Yeah, you won't get where you're going. Definitely not. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you can't drive if you can't drive from North Carolina over to Georgia or to Tennessee, chances are you really don't want to go to Houston, and that's okay. It's
That's good.
just being honest with yourself about
That is so good, Terrell. That's really good because I think did you say thank you?
it. I did.
It is good. But yeah, I think one thing that a lot of times, like just that honesty with yourself, like I don't know what it is that I want to do, but at least give yourself the opportunity to like figure it out. And I think that will really personally, I would say like avoid regret because I know that's a conversation you and I have had where I've been like, hey, I really want to try this or I want to do this or whatever. And then I'm hesitating because I don't want to do it. And then I find like, okay, fine, let me just try it. And then you try it and you find out like that's not what you want to do. Like I think about the show that the venture I started to try to start in Cincinnati. Like I did that and real quick I knew like, ooh, that's not what I wanted to do. And I think it's now like not ever like wondering like, man, like what would have happened if I really went for it. So I think just making the decision to like try it. And then if it doesn't work, like, okay, well, you can move on to the next thing. So,
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, I'm proud of you of that because
oh, thanks, babe.
there was something. I mean, when I remember when you first came up with the idea, hey, I want to be a lifestyle blogger, and like, okay, all right, let's
My
try it
life
out.
is bloggable.
You know, we did it for like you did it 1 week really, really well,
I
and then
did.
the next week I'm like, hey, you know, you got to film because you got to put out another episode, and you're like, and at that point I knew you don't really want to do this, and then like
It
I
was
said,
a
you
lot
just
of work that I was not willing to put in. It was a lot of work. Okay, I had to film. I had to look up the stuff that was going on Thursday, film it on Thursday, release it on Friday. I was like, you know what? Anybody got time for this?
The thing is, in the beginning, you're not gonna get really any results because, like, when you first started off, like, especially with anything like a show or anything, people aren't gonna be paying attention to you early in the beginning. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't have a brand. And like, I always say it this way: you haven't earned the right to have people's attention on what you are doing yet. I mean, it's gonna take a couple episodes before you earn the right to have their attention. But I think, like I said, you figured out that that wasn't what you wanted to do. And I think where the determination comes in is just being okay and say, hey, I'm determined to figure out what it is that I want to do. And maybe that means going through some things that aren't, you know, the thing. And maybe that means going through some things that, hey, this isn't it. But once you get committed to, hey, I'm going to find whatever it is that I really want to do. And then when you find that thing, like, hey, I'm going to stick with it and I'm going to be patient to see the results at the end of it all. So,
I want to
thank
say.
you guys. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to say one last thing that I also think is key is through that process of trying and figuring out what you want is like Terrell said, like you haven't earned the right to be watched. So don't feel ashamed. Like, oh my gosh, if I do this and I quit, like everyone's going to know. Nobody's watching it. Nobody's watching it. Okay. So just try it. Try the business. Try to sell. Don't go sell it to your family. Try to sell to somebody else. Because then if it doesn't work, you can come back and be like, okay, rebound. Like a lot of my friends don't know that I do this Spanish show because to be honest, at that point, I really wasn't dedicated to it. So now that I'm going ham, like you do it and then you can have the conversation. So don't be afraid of like the shame of like, well, what are people going to say? Like I tried this and it didn't work. Go for it. Do it. And to be honest, like a lot of us think like people are watching, the world is watching. People are concerned about their own things. So trust me, no one will know. Except maybe the people that you tell. So really just take that mindset out and like focus on what could happen. And if I don't like it, I'll move on to the next thing. So that's the only thing I wanted to say, Terrell. So go ahead.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for watching the Business Talk Library on RETV. If you'd like to see more of the Business Talk Library, be sure to watch us every week on Tuesday nights at 6 p.m.